Hi, this is Usha. Welcome to Rathod Science classes. Today in this lecture, we are going to see the current affairs of 28th August 2021. In this lecture, we are going to discuss 11 topics which are very much relevant to UPSC. So let's get started with our discussion and let us see list of the topics we are going to discuss in this lecture. So first topic we are going to see the path for monetization. So in yesterday's lecture we studied about asset monetization, right? So what are the steps which are taken by government mainly to move towards that monetization path? So that mainly discussed in this article. So that will be important from our economy point of view, which comes under GS paper 3. And next one is Deeper Bill. Okay, so this Deeper Bill got ecological sensitive zone. So because of this, we need to know what is this ecological sensitive zone or eco-sensitive zone, and what will be the significance, and what are the activities that can be permitted, that are prohibited in that areas. And this will be important from environment and ecology point of view, which comes in the GS paper 3. And next one it is about Jallianwala Bagh Memorial. So here recently we saw this Jallianwala Bagh Memorial mainly renovated. So because of this, we need to go back to our modern history and we need to revise this. What is this Jallianwala Bagh event? And that will be important from our modern history, which comes under GS paper 1. And next one it is about black hole merger. So here what happened recently, one article published in Astrophysics, it mainly says that 3 black holes they merged. Okay, so this event mainly saw. Okay, so by using some telescope, so this will be important from our science and technology. And here we need to know what is this black hole and how this black hole formed. And next one is new species to our fauna wealth. So recently Geological Survey of India added some species to our fauna of our India. So that will be important from our environment and ecology, which comes under GS paper 3. And next one about recently here the approval for 7 Himalayan hydrological project, which mainly come up by government. So actually we know that recently what are the incidents that happened during in this hydropower projects in Himalayan regions. So what happened recently Rishiganga, okay, so we saw recent flash floods in this Uttarakhand. So here already this area which is ecologically very much sensitive area, and here we can see this area will also comes under earthquake zone. So whether when we are going for this hydropower projects in this area it will be feasible or not. So we need to think about that. So again this article will be important from environment and ecology, which comes under GS paper 3. And next one is Indo-Australia relations. So one article in page number 13, that is business paper, said that we are going to have comprehensive economic cooperation between India and Australia regarding trade. Okay, so because of this it will be important from even international relations, and even here we are going to study under economy point of view. And now later on we are going to discuss one more important scheme, that is sovereign bond scheme. So under the sovereign bond, government came up with the fixing of prices of this sovereign gold bond scheme of phase 6. So this will be important from our economy and also schemes and policies of government, which comes under GS paper 2. And next topic we are going to talk about Afghanistan and India. So recently suicide bomb which made a blast in near outside the airport of Kabul. So in this context we need to think about what are the threats which are posed to India and what are the things that can be done like way forward. So this article will be important from international relations, which comes under GS paper 2. And next one is it is about appointment of judges to Supreme Court. So recently 9 judges are appointed, okay, in Supreme Court. So because of this is the news, and we need to see what is the importance. And later on we are going to see another article regarding this asset monetization. So this asset monetization and this program which is mainly seen highly in news. So I will be trying to make a separate video on this scheme, okay, for sure. So this topic will be important from economy, which comes under GS paper 3. So these are the list of the topics we are going to discuss in this lecture. So let's get started with our discussion and let us see first topic now. Title says Center to Ease Path for Monetization. So this article mainly saying that yes, mainly to attain this asset monetization, we need to go for easing of path. So here, what is this asset monetization? For example, if we have an asset, okay, asset means nothing but property, but we are not using that. So if you are not using that, we are not generating any income for that from that. So whenever we are giving this asset to any private people, right, so they will helpful for government, because so this private people, they will give money for government, and as well as this private people, whenever they are involved in this asset, they will also go for development of this so and so area. So in this way, it will be it will lead to improvement in that asset, and as well as it will generate some income. Okay, but here we are not sharing the ownership, but we are just giving that so and so area for lease for private players. Okay, so this is about some introduction regarding this topic. So this topic will be important regarding GS paper 3 under economy. So now let us try to see context. So recently our Union Finance Minister chair a meeting. Our Union Minister will going to chair a meeting of Financial Stability and Development Council. So what is this Finance Stability and Development Council? We are going to discuss. Okay, don't worry about that. So here, why our Finance Minister, she is going to chair this meeting of Financial Stability and Development Council, mainly to come up with financial regulators to relax and to harmonize investment norms for instruments. So whatever the asset monetization the government said, so regarding that, here government need to come up with financial regulators, and they need to relax and they need to harmonize investment norms for instruments. And next one is they need to come up with infrastructure investment trust. They use it to monetize public assets, for example highways, gas pipelines, and as well as railway tracks. And if you see some more details which are given in this article, which mainly says that, so here government mainly plans to smoothen the process of asset monetization. So what are the steps that are going to be taken? So Niti Aayog, which is mainly expecting that it will get about rupees 6 lakh crore national monetization pipeline. So it wants infra investment norms streamlined across financial sectors. So across the financial sectors, whatever the norms are present, we need to come up with the relaxation of those norms. And next one is Financial Stability and Development Council, so which mainly chaired by our Finance Minister. So they expect to mainly come up with some ease regulations. And next important point here is RBI, SEBI and PFRDA, IRDA and Finance Ministry officials. They are part of this council, and this council mainly designed to enhance inter-regulator coordination. So under this, even pension funds and insurers, mutual funds, banks, they have varying restrictions on investing in infrastructure investment trust and as well as real estate investment trust. So these are some important details which are mainly given. And if you're talking about some facts regarding this Financial Stability and Development Council, so this council mainly established as a non-statutory apex council. So here this council mainly established under Ministry of Finance under executive order. It is not a constitutional body, it is not a statutory body, but it is mainly a non-statutory body which constituted by executive order in 2010. And the Raghuram Rajan Committee of 2008 on financial sector reforms proposed for creation of this FSDC. And if you're talking about composition, so this council mainly chaired by our Finance Minister. So council chaired by Finance Minister, and its members mainly includes heads of all finance sector regulators, for example RBI, SEBI, PFRDA, IRDA, Finance Secretary, and also Secretary of Department of Economic Affairs and Secretary of Department of Financial Services and Chief Economic Advisor. So this FSDC subcommittee mainly headed by Governor of RBI. So this is one important prelims fact. And now let us try to see what are the functions. So if you see functions, it mainly says that the important objective of this FSDC, it is to mainly strengthen and it need to institutionalize the mechanism for maintaining of financial stability. So we need to maintain financial stability in our country. So here this is very important for even strengthening and as well as institutionalizing the mechanisms. And this one is here, this FSDC also intends to monitor macro-prudential supervision of economy. So it is also helpful to monitor macro-prudential supervision of economy, and it will also assess the functioning of large financial conglomerates. So these are some important things that you need to remember regarding this topic. And now let us move on to next topic. Deeper bill breeds easy after zone notification. So this deeper bill had got eco-sensitive areas, eco-sensitive zone. So here this article will be important from your environment and ecology, which comes under GS paper 3. So now let us try to see context. If you see context, it mainly says that on August 25th, our Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change notified eco-sensitive zone of this deeper bill wildlife sanctuary. So here our Ministry of Environment and Climate, Forest and Climate Change notified this eco-sensitive zone of this deeper bill wildlife sanctuary. So here now we need to understand what is this eco-sensitive zones, and as well as what are the importance of these eco-sensitive zones, and what are the functions or what are the things which are mainly prohibited and as well as which are prevented and even that can be allowed in these eco-sensitive zones. So if you understand that, you can understand so how these eco-sensitive zones, it will be very important for our biodiversity conservation also. So if you're talking about some facts regarding this eco-sensitive zones, so these zones are also called as ecologically fragile areas. So these eco-sensitive zones, they are with about 10 kilometers around protected areas and even national parks and even sanctuaries. So if you are having any protected areas or national parks or even wildlife sanctuaries, so within 10 kilometers of a radius, okay, 10 kilometers around the protected area, we are having this type of this areas, that is eco-sensitive zones. So these eco-sensitive zones, they are mainly notified by Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, okay, under Environment Protection Act of 1986. So this is one important thing. So in case of places with several sensitive corridors and even connectivity and ecologically important patches, so it is very much crucial for landscape linkage and even area which is beyond 10 kilometers of width and can be included in the eco-sensitive zone. And this one is the important aim of this eco-sensitive zone. It is to regulate certain actions or certain activities around the national park and as well as wildlife sanctuaries. So this will mainly helpful to minimize the negative impacts of such activities in this fragile ecosystem. And now let us try to see what are the activities in these economically sensitive zones. So first one is, if you are talking about prohibited areas, so which are the things which are mainly prohibited, that are not allowed to do in this areas means, so commercial mining we cannot go through this, and saw mining and industries which are mainly causing pollution, for example air pollution, for example water pollution, soil pollution, noise pollution, etc. And also it is not the activities which are mainly prohibited include establishment of major hydroelectric projects and even commercial use of wood, tourism activities like hot air balloons over the national parks, and as well as the discharge of effluents or any solid waste which is mainly produced of this hazardous substances, for example radioactive substances, etc. So these are the things which are mainly prohibited in these areas. And if you are talking about which are the regulated activities, so felling of trees and as well as establishment of hotels and resorts and even commercial use of water and erection of electrical cables and also drastic change of agriculture system and adoption of heavy industry or heavy technology, pesticides, etc. here. So these are the some important regulatory activities that we can see in this eco-sensitive areas. And if you're talking about permitted activities, which are the activities that are permitted? So if you're talking about especially permitted activities, so ongoing agriculture and horticulture practices and even rainwater harvesting and organic farming, that is zero budget farming, and use of renewable energy sources and adoption of green technology for all activities. So these are very much important, and these are mainly the permitted activities in this eco-sensitive zones or eco-sensitive areas. So now let us try to talk about what is the significance of this ESZ, ecologically sensitive areas. So first and the foremost thing here is it will be helpful mainly to minimize the impact of urbanization. So it will be helpful mainly to minimize or to reduce impact of urbanization and as well as other developmental activities, for also other developmental activities and as well as to decrease the impact of this urbanization. So this ecological sensitive areas are very important. And next one is the purpose of clearing these eco-sensitive zones around protected areas. It is for creating some kind of shock absorber. Okay, so shock absorber of this protected areas. And this one is they also act as a transition zone. Okay, they also act as transition zone of high protection to areas which are involving less protection. And next one is here ecologically sensitive zones. They help in the in situ conservation, that means inside. Okay, so if you're talking about conservation, we are having two types of conservation, that is in situ conservation and as well as ex situ conservation. So ex situ conservation means we are carrying so and so genes from that animal to another place and there we are producing this animal. And in situ means inside that area and that habitat we are going for conservation activities. For example, we also went for conservation of one-horned rhinoceros in Kaziranga. Okay, in Kaziranga National Park, and this national park mainly located in Assam. And this one is they also act as transition between the areas of high protection and also the areas which are involving lesser population. Okay, so this is also one important thing here. So whenever we are going for any developmental things or any environment related things, so they need to act as a transition, they need to act as a transition zone and for higher protection to areas involving lesser protection. So this is the thing that we need to follow actually. And next one is the eco-sensitive zones. They also have the capability to minimize forest depletion and as well as man-made conflict, to decrease this man-made conflict and as well as to minimize forest depletion. So this will be very much helpful here. Okay, so now let's try to talk about what is this Deepar Bale and some facts regarding this Deepar Bale. So this Deepar Bale located in south and western of Guwahati city. Okay, so in Guwahati city this Deepar Bale it is mainly seen, and it is a permanent freshwater lake. So this is one important plus fact, and it is a permanent freshwater lake. So in the former channel, the Brahmaputra river to south and as well as it is a main river, right? And if you're talking about wetland under this Ramsar Convention, which has listed since November 2012 for undertaking some conservation measures on the basis of biological and as well as environmental importance. So we need to take into conservation as into our plans, and we need to take into consideration regarding this biological and environmental importance, and finally we need to come up with a database, or finally we need to come up with what are the things we are going to come up. And next one is it is mainly considered as one of the largest beels in Brahmaputra Valley of Lower Assam, and also acts an important bird sanctuary. Okay, habituating with migrants people. So it is also have bird sanctuary. Okay, so this is very important, and in this region there are many migrant people, they mainly seen here, and not only this migrant people but also even migrant species of animals. So the freshwater fish, it is a vital protection and a vital portion actually, and they will serve as a source of income for these communities. Okay, the health of these people, they stated that they to be directly dependent on the health of this wetland ecosystem. So how the people are living, and these people around that area, that will be dependent on this lake, right? So here because of this, so here how the people are there, how the health of the people is there, so that is mainly dependent to this wetland ecosystem. And now let us try to see next topic. It is about Jallianwala Bagh Memorial renovated. So this article, it is important regarding GS paper 1 under modern history. So now let us try to see this topic in a very great detail. So first let us try to see this context. So if you see context, it mainly says that the main 4 museum galleries, they mainly restored well with new amenities for visitors. So there are 4 museum galleries, and these 4 museum galleries, they have been restored well, and they came up with new amenities here, okay, that will be provided for visitors. Okay, the renovation of this Jallianwala Bagh Memorial in Amritsar, it would be dedicated to nation by our Prime Minister Ji. So memorial mainly includes sound and as well as light snow to depict the events of April 13, 1919. So on this April 13, 1919, so it is a memorial day that you should not forget at all. So on this day, this Jallianwala Bagh massacre that happened during this British rule. Let us try to see facts regarding this Jallianwala Bagh massacre. So if you see, this Jallianwala Bagh massacre mainly happened on April 13th, right? So on April 13th, 1919, this event was happened. So if you're talking about some important facts on this Baisakhi day, so this April 13th, 1919 was Baisakhi. So on this Baisakhi day, local residents in Amritsar, they mainly decided to hold meetings. Okay, so the local people, they decided to hold meetings, and they want to discuss and they want to protest against confinement of Satyapal and as well as Safiuddin Kichlu. So these were the 2 leaders who fighting for independence at that time, and also they want to discuss about the implementation of Rowlatt Act. So what happened in this crowd? So this crowd was a mixture of men, women and as well as children. So this crowd was mixture of men, women and as well as children, and they gathered in this park. Okay, this is called as Jallianwala Bagh. So if you see this park, if you are talking about this park, it is having a small gates actually. So this park, which is having a walls on all the side, but they are having a few very small gates. So what happened? So at that time, General Dyer, okay, General Dyer came into that area, and he ordered soldiers mainly to open fire. So in that event, many people, they died in this event. So if you're talking about outcomes of this Jallianwala Bagh, so here this event mainly concerned the butcher of Amritsar. In aftermath of this massacre, General Dyer was removed from command and he exiled to Britain. So this is the first outcome. And second one is Rabindranath Tagore and as well as our Mahatma Gandhi, they mainly renowned their titles like knighthood and as well as Kaisar-i-Hind Medal respectively. And next one is in 1992, the infamous Rowlatt Act was repealed by British. So these are outcomes of this Jallianwala Bagh massacre. And now let us try to see next topic. Title says Indian astrophysics spot rare merger of 3 jumbo black holes. So this article mainly talking about merger of this black holes. First let us try to see context. So this article will be important from science and technology, which mainly comes under this GS paper 3. So now let us try to talk about this topic in a very great detail. So if you see context, it mainly says that, so a rare merging, okay, it is a very rare event, rare merging of 3 supermassive black holes. So rare merging of supermassive black holes has been spotted by a team of astrophysics, and this article published in Astrophysics, right? So if you're talking about some details here, so team were observing the merging of 2 galaxies. So name of this galaxy is NGC 7733 and another one is 4. Okay, so these are the 2 galaxies they are mainly observing by this team at celestial neighborhood, and they detected unusual emissions. So when they started seeing or observing this merging of these 2 galaxies, and they detected mainly unusual emissions that is happening at center. So they mainly found that all 3 merging black holes were part of galaxies. So there are 3 black holes are merging, and this event that led to releasing of unusual emissions. So these galaxies are mainly seen in this Taucan constellation, and it is about 2.5 million light years away. Okay, so these are some important details. And if you're talking about what is a black hole, so black hole, it mainly refers a point. If you are considered this as a space, so here we have one point. So in this point, the matter, it is a very much compressed. That means we can see a tight fitted matter, and also it mainly created a gravity field. So in this gravity field, even light cannot escape. So these parts in our space, they are called as black holes. So this concept of black holes was theorized by Albert Einstein in 1915, and the term black hole was coined in the mid of 1960s by American physicists. Okay, and now let us try to understand how this black hole mainly formed. To understand this, you need to look at this image. So this image mainly talks about life cycle of a star. So whenever we have a stellar nebula it is nothing but a cloud which is containing dust particles, so and so. So after this, what happened, this stellar nebula will be converted into average star or a massive star. So it is based on mass of that star. So this average star in next stage, they will be converted into red giant, and this red giant mainly converts into this planetary nebula, and finally it will lead to the white dwarf. And if you're talking about this massive star, which will be having mass which is more than compared to that of our sun. Okay, so this massive star will be converted into this red supergiant, and finally it will be converted into supernova. This supernova either converted into neutron star or a black hole. So in this way, here we can say this black hole, it is a final stage of a big massive star. And now let us move on to next topic. Title says India added 557 new species to faunal wealth in 2020, says Geological Survey of India. So Geological Survey of India mainly says that India added about 557 new species to our wealth of fauna. Fauna, it is nothing but animals. Okay, so if we're talking about wealth of biodiversity, we can say it will be like fauna and as well as flora. Flora means plants will comes here, fauna means animals which comes here, right? So this article will be important regarding GS paper 3 under environment and ecology. So now let us try to see this topic in a very great detail. So now let us try to see context. So India added about 557 new species to its fauna, and it includes mainly out of this 557, 407 are new species and 150 they are new records. So out of this 557 new species, it mainly includes 407 new species are present and 150 new records are present. So this is the data which is mainly reveals in animal which also includes animal discoveries of 2020, and this document released by Zoological Survey of India. So if you're talking about further more details, it mainly says that the number of faunal species in India has climbed. That means by adding this new species, now it is about 1,02,718 species. Okay, and among the new species, some interesting species that discovered in 2020 include green pit viper. It mainly discovered in which place? In state of Arunachal Pradesh. And Deccan wolf snake discovered in Karnataka. Burrowing frog mainly discovered in city of Bangalore, and a deep water species of snake eel from Kerala, and a species of catfish from Manipur, and species of scrap beetle in Great Nicobar Biosphere. So these are some interesting discoveries in 2020. Now let us try to see some facts regarding this Geological Survey of India. So this Geological Survey of India, it is a subordinate organization of our Ministry of Environment Forest, and this Geological Survey of India, which mainly established even we got our independence. Before we got independence in year 1916. So in 1916 only we got this Geological Survey of India, and it is a national center for faunistic survey. So it mainly does the survey for new animals, and it will be also helpful for exploration of resources which are leading to advancement of knowledge on exceptionally rich faunal diversity of our country. And if you're talking about headquarters of this Geological Survey of India, which are mainly located in Kolkata, and there are about 16 regional stations throughout our country. So these are some important facts that you need to remember. Now let us try to see next topic. Title says ministries agree to allow 7 Himalayan hydel projects. So this article mainly talking about recently ministries they agreed to approve, or we can say to allow. Okay, ministries approved go for this 7 Himalayan hydel projects. So this article will be important regarding GS paper 3 under environment and ecology. So after this approval, many environmental activists they mainly posed some issues regarding this approval. So now let us try to see the background. So if you see background, it mainly says that 6 months after devastating flood. So actually we saw devastating flood that occurred in this Rishiganga river in Uttarakhand recently, right? So because of this flash floods that killed about at least 200 people, and also that led to severely damage to 2 hydropower projects. Okay, now union ministries, that is central government, which initially had some dissenting views, that is we are not going to accept and that will lead to some problems, right? Then what happened now? Now it gave approval for 7 hydropower projects in this Himalayan region. So if you're talking about some important details, it mainly says that, so according to an affidavit which mainly filed in Supreme Court, mainly talking about ongoing case of feasibility of hydroelectric power projects aftermath of this 2013 Uttarakhand floods. So in 2013 also Uttarakhand faced flash floods, and recently in 2021 also we experienced this flash floods in Uttarakhand. So there are 7 projects. After this also there are 7 projects have been allowed. Okay, so now about 7 projects they have been allowed. So the important reason said by government is almost 50% of this project has been completed. So we need to complete the entire project. So those 7 projects include Tehri Stage 2 Dam, and as well as Tapovan Vishnugandh and Vishnugandh Pipalkoti and Singoli Batwali, and also Fata Buyang and Madhya Maheshwar and Kali Ganga too. So these are those 7 projects. Now let us try to see some concerns. So if you see concerns, it mainly says that there were 2 projects that includes Singoli Batwari and as well as Fata Buyang. So they were specifically linked to this Kedarnath strategy that happened in 2013. So it is one of important concern, and one important concern which are mainly posed by this environmental activists, they include there is no proper disaster warning system is present. And now let us try to talk about why hydropower projects they endanger this Himalayan region. So this part will be very important if you want to write your mains question. So recently a study published in 2008, and this study reveals that earthquake borne damage sustained by hydropower projects in Nepal. So as you know that this Indo-Australian plate which moved towards northwards and hit this Eurasian plate, right? So here because of this Himalayas that mainly formed. So these Himalayas are folded mountains. So what happened this area, we can see this area comes under highly earthquake prone areas. So in this highly earthquake prone areas, whenever we are going for building of hydropower projects, then that will lead to disaster, right? So that will lead to loss to our government, because to build these projects we need huge amount of investment, and if at all any damage to this project is happening, and whenever there is a flash flood that is happening, that will lead to loss of the life, also life and property. So in this way, here study recently published in 2018 says that so earthquake borne damage sustained by this hydropower projects in Nepal, and the main mechanism that contributed to vulnerability of hydropower projects, they are mainly due to landslides. So even in Himachal Pradesh, in the last 1 month, we discussed number of articles regarding landslides. So because of landslides and even earthquakes, that will leads to damage to our hydropower projects. And we can also see heavy siltation. So what is the meaning of siltation? Whenever river which is moving. So as you all know, these Himalayan rivers, they will move with a high speed and they will be having much carrying capacity than compared to that of these peninsular rivers. So whenever rivers are moving with a high speed, they will be having capability to bring sediments. So because of this, the sediments will be deposited. So because of this, what happened finally, carrying capacity of these rivers will be decreased. So whenever carrying capacity is decreased, whenever the carrying capacity is decreased, and they will change the course of a river, right? So heavy siltation from giant landslides, which mainly expected that will decrease efficiency of this dams. And next one is that will also severely lead to reducing water holding capacity and also life expectancy of dams. And next one is whenever we are going for desilting of dams, it is not an economically viable proportion. So recently one article we discussed about this desilting of dams also, right? So if you are following our YouTube channel regularly, then you will be updated. Okay, so recently we discussed about the desilting of dams. So many of dams that are present in India, they are almost very old, and the carrying capacity of that dam also been decreased. And even without earthquakes, the steep slopes they made of soft rocks, they are bound to slide due to deforestation as well as road building in these ecologically sensitive areas. And these activities, they will get intensified as part of dam building initiatives. So because of this Himalayan areas, they are very much vulnerable. And next one is significance of Himalayas. So if we are talking about significance of Himalayas, so Himalayan range, it is a transnational mountain chain, right? And it is a chief driver of Asian climate. So it plays an important role even in our Indian monsoons, right? And it is also source of numerous Asian river systems and even glaciers. So because of this climate change, we are also seeing melting of glaciers, and there is increase in the number of glacial lakes also. And these river systems, they provide water for billions of people. And this river system, which is originating from this Himalayas like Ganga, Brahmaputra and as well as Indus, they were the major source for agriculture, right? And next one is, now the military frontations, they also had led to demands for further and infrastructure development, include all weather roads in this Himalayan region. So finally, if you are going for any developmental projects and dams like this, then that will have finally impact on regional biodiversity and as well as livelihood of indigenous people. So this is gist of this topic, and I hope it is clear. Now let us try to see next topic. Title says India Australia aim for early harvest trade pact by December. So here you need to understand what is the meaning of this early harvest trade pact. So this article will be important from economy point of view, and we are talking relationship between India and Australia. So this will be also important from international relations, which comes in a GS paper too. So if we are talking about context, it mainly says that the Trade Minister of India and Australia, they agreed to speed up trade negotiations. So our Trade Minister and as well as Trade Minister of Australia, they agreed to speed up the trade negotiations. An important aim between here, it is to reach early harvest pact by December. Okay, so this early harvest pact mainly talks about liberalizing and also bilateral flow of goods and services, which mainly talks about liberalizing and as well as it also talking about to increase trade between these two countries. If you are talking about some important details, it mainly says that so commerce and industry minister, they met Australia's Minister for Trade, Tourism and Investment virtually. So Minister of Commerce and Industry and Australian minister, they met recently virtually through video conference. And in this meeting, they discussed to roadmap for conducting of comprehensive economic cooperation agreement. So if you see news, you will be come across CECA and as well as CEPA. Okay, so don't confuse with this. Here cooperation, it is partnership. So here this article mainly talking about this CECA. And Australia, which is mainly said that India, it is a long-standing, valued and as well as trusted partner for Australia. So already they completed 3 rounds of talks. So now let us try to talk about what is this early harvest deal. So if you're talking about this early harvest deal, it is a precursor to free trade agreement. So before, when we are coming with this free trade agreement, the first thing we will do is early harvest deal. So what is this early harvest deal deals about? So here under this early harvest deal, so both involving partners, they reduce tariff barriers on limited goods mainly to promote trade between these two countries. And as I said earlier, in newspaper you can see the CECA and as well as CEPA, right? Okay, Comprehensive Economic Cooperation Agreement. Next one is Comprehensive Economic Partnership, right? So if you're talking about CECA, and what is the difference between the CECA and CEPA? So one thing I can say here is this CEPA, that is partnership, it is a very much broader than compared to that of this cooperation agreement. So here in CECA, it mainly involves only tariff reductions and elimination in a phased manner on list on all items except negative list in tariff rate quota items. So here this CECA mainly involves tariff reduction and as well as even elimination in a phased manner that will be done on a listed items. And if you're talking about SEPA will cover trade in services, trade in investments and even other areas of economic partnership. So here CEPA, which is very much broader than compared to that of this CECA. So this is just of this topic, and now let us move on to next topic. Title says RBI prices series 6. Okay, RBI prices series 6 of gold bond. So finally the price of this gold bond, that is under the sovereign gold bond scheme, phase 6 price has been set up by RBI. So this article will be important regarding GS paper 3, and even this article can be studied under schemes, policies and programs of government. So now let us try to see this topic in a very great detail. So first let us try to understand the context. So if you see context, it mainly says that recently RBI, Reserve Bank of India, announced the price for this sovereign gold bond scheme series 6. So for this sovereign gold bond scheme series 6, so RBI came up with the setting up of price, and this gold bonds will be available for subscription from August 30, okay, from August 30 till September 1st. So if you're talking about details, it mainly says that the nominal value of bond. So what will be the value of that bond? So that value of bond which mainly decided based on price of gold with purity of 999 purity. Okay, so before subscription period, at least before that, how many? 3 days. So before that subscription date, so at least 3 days before, so how much amount of price is present for that gold based on 999 purity. So based on that, price will be fixed, and now the price is about 4,732 rupees per 1 gram of gold. Now let us try to understand what is the sovereign gold bonds first of all. So what is the sovereign gold bonds? So I can say like, so if I have 5,000 rupees, if I want to buy a 1 gram of gold, for example, let us take for my earrings. But instead of buying earrings, I can go and I can buy this bond. So if I buy a bond, they will be giving me a certificate. Okay, certificate, that is like a promissory note, that's it. Okay, so this is sovereign gold bond. Instead of buying my physical gold, I am getting this bond, that's it. So if you're talking about the sovereign gold bond, so it is like a government security. So it is a sovereign gold bonds, they are government securities, and here these bonds are denominated in the grams of gold, 1 gram, 2 gram, 3 gram, like that. And here why this scheme came up by government? So actually we are importing gold from other countries. So whenever we are importing gold from other countries, we need to pay in foreign reserves, right? So mainly to decrease the usage of gold, government came up with this sovereign gold bond scheme. So it is a mainly substitute for holding of physical gold. And what will be advantage? So it mainly offers superior alternative to hold gold in a physical form. The risk and the cost of the storage will be eliminated. For example, if I have 10 grams of gold, I need to keep in my locker, and if I am coming to office, then I should be fear like, So who will come, and whether any thief will come to my house and he will take away my 10 grams of gold, right? So here, whenever I am buying this bond, we cannot have that much. So the risk will be very much less, and as well as we need not think about storage much. And investors, they are assumed of market value of gold at the time of maturity. So at the time of maturity, so how much price of the gold is present, so based on that I will be getting periodical interest. And the bonds will be sold mainly through scheduled commercial banks except small finance banks and payment banks, and also Stock Holding Corporation of India Limited and designated post offices and recognized stock exchanges, etc. So they will sell this bonds. And if you're talking about some important features of this scheme of 2021 to 2022, so this will be important for mains and as well as prelims. So if you're talking about important features, so these bonds, they will be issued by RBI on behalf of Government of India. So Government of India will not be going to issue these bonds, but Reserve Bank of India is going to issue. And next one is the bonds will be restricted for sale to resident individuals and as well as HUS, trust, universities and as well as charitable institutions. And the bonds, they will be denominated in multiples of grams, like 1 unit of gram of gold, 2 units, 3 units, like that. So tenure of bond will be period of 5 years, and there will be also exit option at 5th year. And minimum permissible investment, that is 1 gram of gold. So now price it is about around 4,800 rupees. And next one is the maximum limit of subscription year. It shall be 4 kgs for individuals, 4 kgs for HUF and 20 kgs for trust. And in case of joint holding, the investment limit of 4 kgs will be applied to first applicant only. So if second applicant they will come, means again there will be given 4 kgs of limit. And if you are talking about price of bonds, so it will be mainly fixed in Indian rupees. So price will be mainly fixed in Indian rupees itself. So this is the one important thing that you need to remember. So price will be fixed in Indian rupees on basis of simple average. Okay. So here average of gold of 999 purity. So here this gold rate will be published by India Bullion and Jewellers Association Limited for last 3 days before subscription period. And the gold bonds will be issued as Government of India stock under GS Act, Government of India Stock Act of 2006. And this one is bonds can be used even as a collateral for loans. I can take that bond and I can keep as a collateral and I can get a loan, as we can do for gold loans, right? And next one is bonds can be tradable even on stock exchanges with a fortnight on issuance on the date as notified by RBI. So if I have a bond, I can also trade in stock exchanges. So these are some important things that you need to remember regarding this topic. Now let us try to see next topic. Title says near and present. So this article mainly talks about suicide bombing in outside this Kabul airport. So this article will be important regarding GS paper 2 under international relations. So I want to give you homework. Please open Afghanistan map and try to see Afghanistan. So I recorded one video regarding Afghanistan mapping. So it will be posted by today evening. So please try to watch that video also, and that will be very helpful. Okay. So now let us try to see central theme. So India does not have the luxury of distance from ticking bomb in its neighborhood. So this article mainly saying that what are the challenges that India can pose. So recently we saw yesterday's lecture like background regarding this bomb which blasted, okay, in Kabul airport. So the suicide bomb which mainly blasted in Afghanistan. So if you're talking about this suicide bombing at Kabul airport which claimed more than 100 lives. And here mainly US mainly come out of this Afghanistan, right? After US came out of Afghanistan, after pulling out of its forces, so they came up, okay, before that only they came up with this Doha talks actually. So in this Doha talks, Taliban accepted that they are not going to use Afghanistan land mainly to carry some terrorist activities against US, and as well as they will not make this Afghanistan land that will be used by other terrorist groups also. But what happened now? Here Islamic State IS Khorasan has proven that no matter what assurances Taliban's new regime or benefactors in Pakistan may provide, so they said that they are unable or willing to stem the terror threat emanating from the country. So if you're talking about why we are thinking and what is the cause of concern for India, so already you know that if you're talking about this Jammu and Kashmir area, okay, northern part of India, so here we have this line of control and here we have line of actual control. So this area which mainly comes under this Pak administration Kashmir, that is Pak occupied Kashmir. So here we have threats from China, here we have threats from Pakistan here. So the threats from Pakistan at LOC and as well as here Pakistan mainly supports cross-border terrorism, and even from China side also we are seeing a line of actual control aggressions here that also led to Galwan Valley incidents. So here across this LAC even military standoff that is seen, okay, there is nothing like completely disengagement that is not yet seen in this LAC region till now. So because of this, here Pakistan and China, they can use Afghanistan soil and they can conduct some terror attacks. So this is one cause of concern for India. So in this context, what can be done? What are the options which are present before India? So we need to focus on diplomacy mainly to highlight concerns of India. And as you all know here, India which is mainly sharing a chairmanship, right? So in this context, India must ensure that United Nations, it is the most powerful body, and we must make red lines clear for kind of government it must be guaranteed in Afghanistan. And as well as we need to include one, like for example, we need to recognize human rights in Afghanistan, and as well as we need to adopt some form of representation from its people, and we need to also distance itself from terror groups. Okay, so these are the some important things we need to ensure in Afghanistan. And even there are some important groups like Haqqani group, etc. they are present, right? So we need to ensure that this Haqqani group and some terror organization, they should not be included in official power structure of Afghanistan, because this Haqqani group has been responsible for terror and as well as suicide attacks on Indian consulates and as well as embassy, especially in 2008 to 2009 attacks in India. So as a chairman of 1988 sanction committee, so this committee already came up with a list of 135 Taliban members. They are designated as terrorists, and India must stand firm, right? And we should not give any access or even travel and as well as funds, weaponry sanctions. We need to impose strict sanctions on those people. And next one is United Nations General Assembly Accreditation Committee must decide whether we need to allow future-led Taliban, that is a Taliban-led Afghanistan government to occupy Afghanistan seat or not. So this is the gist of this topic, and I hope it is clear. Now let us try to see next topic. So filled to the nines. So this article mainly talking about Supreme Court judges, right? So if you're talking about context or central theme of this article, which mainly says that appointment in Supreme Court, it is a welcome step. So if you're talking about this article which mainly focusing on appointment of judges in Supreme Court, so actually what happened, 9 judges are appointed to Supreme Court in a one go. So this is one of the historical move that we saw. So it is a welcome sign of cooperation between judiciary and as well as executive, okay, because whenever the recommendation which is given by collegium to president, okay, so President of India signed warrants for appointment of those 9 people. So within a days of 5-member collegium recommending about 8 High Court judges, including 3 women and a lawyer of elevation. So what's the lawyer of elevation means? So from High Court, lawyer will be elevated to Supreme Court, right? So it is a very rare case actually. So till now it is the sixth time we saw elevation of High Court judge to Supreme Court judge that we see. Okay, and nearly 2 years since Supreme Court appointments were made. So now once ago 9 judges were appointed in Supreme Court. So now the strength of Supreme Court it mainly goes to 32, actually sanction strength is 34. Okay, so this is the thing, and one important thing here is, so here Justice B.V. Nagaratna elevation, it is very important because she is going to be, she may be, not exactly, she may be becoming a first woman Chief Justice of India. Okay, so this is the one important thing, and also one important thing that you need to remember here is appointing members of bar, bar council also directly to Supreme Court continues with the honor going to be this time to former additional Solicitor General also. And if you are talking about one important question which mainly raised here is, so one notable candidate, he is Justice Akhil Qureshi. So he is the Chief Justice of Tripura High Court. He also one of the important and as well as All India seniority list of High Court. So he also mainly present in the list of All India seniority list of High Court judges, but he was not appointed. So this is the one cause of concern here. So author mainly says that we need opaque collegium system. So this is the gist of this topic. And now let us try to see next topic. So before seeing this topic, I want to make a small announcement on this platform. So if you want to clear UPSC 2022, we came up with one excellent, highly beneficial and as well as highly economical course, that is current affairs package along with means answer writing practice. So how this course will be useful to clear this UPSC 2022. So before entering into examination hall, you need to know at least 1.5 years current affairs. And this is right time to join this course to cover this 1.5 year current affairs in a comprehensive manner. And next one is mains answer writing practice. So many students ignore this mains answer writing practice. So because of this, even though if you clear prelims, you cannot clear mains without answer writing skills. And next one is here. If you join this course, we also conduct prelims test and we provide you video explanation part. So in this way, this course which is designed as per demand of UPSC. So finally, I want to say one thing. Please don't take this course as a choice. Try to join this course as soon as possible and achieve your dream of clearing UPSC. So details of this course which is given in description box. So please visit that once. And if you want to talk to me directly, you can call to this number 8074765513. Okay. And now let us see next article. Title says asset monetization execution is the key. So this article may be talking about asset monetization. In yesterday's lecture, we also discussed about this topic. And now let us try to see in detail regarding this asset monetization. And this topic is very important. I am trying to come up with a separate video regarding this asset monetization. So if you see context here, recently our government announced that an ambitious program that is of asset monetization. And through this asset monetization, here government mainly expecting to earn about rupees 6 trillion, rupees 6 trillion in revenues that will be retained within a 4 years of period of time. So why? Because now due to this COVID-19 pandemic, government which is also in a very financially bad condition to mainly get some revenue. So this decision may be taken by government. So if you're talking about details, it mainly says that in this asset monetization, government parts with its assets like roads and as well as coal mines for a specific period of time. Okay. So at the period or at the end of the period, assets mainly return to government. That means here government which is mainly giving lease, giving for lease, not for sharing of sharing of nothing, but it is not sharing the ownership, but it is going for just giving for a lease. So unlike privatization, there is no sale of government asset is involved, but here asset monetization which mainly happens in 3 sectors. So if you're talking about privatization means, so some amount, some part of that so and so institution that is mainly sold to private. That means we are sharing transfer of ownership also, but here just we are giving lease, that is for rent. Right, so this asset monetization mainly done in 3 sectors like roads, railways and as well as powers. And also other sectors may also include airports, ports, telecom, stadiums, and as well as power transmission. So if you're talking about focus areas, or two important focus areas here. So first one is we are mainly focusing on underutilized assets. For example, if you have an airport here, for example, if you are taking airport or stadium, so and so area which is not at all used and it is empty space. So here we are giving this space as a lease to private sector. So whenever we are giving lease, government can get revenue, and here private sector that will improve infrastructure. So in this way it will be win-win situation for private sector and as well as for even government here. And second one is monetization, that will be happen through public-private partnership and investment trust. So these are the two important focus areas. So if you're talking about variation and issues regarding this asset monetization, so first one is it is very difficult to get valuation right over a long term horizon. For example, say 30 years. For example, now the value it is about, let us take rupees 5,000. Just it is a hypothetical example. But if you see after 10 years it may be 50,000 rupees, and after 20 years it may be 2 lakh rupees. So we can't go for estimation of value now because based on our future, right? So one question which mainly posed here is, does anybody know what would be the growth rate of economy after so and so period? No one, right? So for example, if you are talking about roads or highways, the growth of traffic, it mainly depends upon the factors like, for example, prices of fuel. If price of fuel which is increasing, means we can say decreasing vehicles, right? And as well as vehicle cost, and whether we need to follow this BS norms or not, whether we need to go for electric vehicles or not. So based on all these factors here, that price will be dependent, but we can't expect, right? And second one is, so after one bidder mainly win, that means so he may also increase the price. So whenever the prices increases, then transporters, they have to pay more. So whenever transporters are paying more, then economy will be suffering. So this is second important problem. And so one is, there is no incentive which is given for private players to invest in asset towards the end of tenure of monetization. So because of this, it will be also one cause of concern. So what will be the other way or other solutions or way forward? So first one is, other than the monetization, so government also can go for creating of infrastructure investment trust. So under this, the monetized assets will be transferred. So this is the first solution. And second one is monetization that can be done through this investment trust, and they likely prone less problems, okay, than compared to that of this PPP routes. And next one is, we can go for better of monetizing underutilized assets than compared to that of utilized assets. And next one is, we need to ensure proper execution. Okay, there is a case for independent monitoring of the process. Okay, so these are the some important things which are mainly discussed in this article. So I hope it is clear. So by this we are concluding today. I hope you enjoyed this lecture. Please subscribe to my channel and don't forget to like, share and comment my videos. And don't forget to subscribe to this current affairs package. Thank you so much.